Welcome back to a new episode of Coffee with Genially. My name is Carla, and I'm the country marketer for the US and Canada at Genially. I am very excited about today's episode because we have someone with a different background than we usually do. Today, we are joined by Shruti Ramaswami. She's Executive Vice President of Strategic Relationships and Strategy at TechSoup. She has nearly 20 years of experience in the intersection between technology and the nonprofit sector. She's been helping organizations worldwide leverage technology for a greater impact. And I'm very excited to have her to talk about what educators can learn from the nonprofit world when it comes to innovation, equity, and keeping people at the center of technology. Welcome, Shruti.
Thank you so much for having me, Carla.
No, thank you for accepting this invitation. I'm very excited to see what takeaways can we get from the nonprofit world for all the educators out there.
Amazing.
So as I mentioned, you have a career in the intersection between technology and social impact. I want to know what first drew you to this space and what kept you inspired to stay here.
Yeah. I started a while ago, as you said, but my first job was actually, I was a consultant, and I was pretty much focused only on the public sector. And so in the US, that was basically like that I was there working to create technology projects for government agencies. And the government agencies, like the goal, regardless of who and which client I was working with, was really to make sure that different community members were able to be reached, or community members were able to get access to services that they needed. So it was the core to me of what social impact really was. It was to make sure that communities had an ability to kind of avail themselves of necessary services or outreach in some ways. And it was the first time I was really exposed, I think, in that way to a systematic way, and really thinking about how technology could facilitate that exchange and make that easier, or really just to see how technology like reduce the gap between these government agencies and the community members. And so I loved that part. That was the part that really fueled me, talking to people, making sure that it really met the needs of the community members. That was my favorite part. And so that like nugget of excitement, that's what's followed me through my career. And also just seeing like whether or not it was just the actual technology itself or just the economic opportunity that was provided by some technologies, that you could see the impact that we could have. And the rest is what we see around the world. There are amazing people doing amazing things all of the time. And so if technology could help them reduce the burden, help them empower themselves, help them reach more people, I think, that's what really excited me and keeps me doing what I want to do. And what I'm doing now is just seeing what everybody else is doing and thinking, okay, I can have a small part of making that happen.
Awesome. Now, TechSoup has helped over a million nonprofits access technology. What parallels do you see between their challenges and the challenges that schools or maybe corporate educators can
Yeah.
face?
So just for a second, TechSoup is a global nonprofit. We've been doing this since 1987. So our goal really is to help other charities, other nonprofits around the world get access to technology and be able to use that technology to further their own missions. And so we've been able to serve so many organizations for so long that we've learned a lot in that time, but really there's so many different parallels, I would say, between schools, education, and nonprofit. And oftentimes they're thought of in some ways together, but I think there's a lot of things that make them very similar. I think they're impact focused, they're mission focused. So they're there to really serve the needs of the public, and they're there to invest in the public, and invest in communities. But they also require, both of them, constant feedback with community members to actually be successful. So with that, I think you have a lot of shared challenges too. So they have tight budgets. They probably have a lot of restricted access to technology. So not always having somebody who is assigned to think about IT strategy, or somebody who's playing the role of a chief technology officer. They also have a lot of what we call accidental techies, or people who are having to play around with technology but might not have formal training, and might not have a formal process. They also have the same challenge of having to respond to community needs, and those community needs are always changing. So it doesn't really matter what their plan was. If something changes within their community, they have to respond to those changes. And so I think that like nimbleness and kind of quick adaptation is something that both of those sectors really face. And then there's also this this environment of regulation, and they're operating in bounds of different changing environments that they have
Yeah.
to respond to as well. And they're also like a nonprofit worker and an educator. They're all there to service other people. So they might have to teach technology. They might have to use technology that their constituents are using and kind of speak and that language in the same similar way. So I think there's a lot of shared challenges and motivations.
Now, thinking about this parallels that you talked
Yeah.
about, from your perspective, what's one example of technology making a transformative difference in a nonprofit that could also be applied to a classroom? I don't know if you may have some specific
Yeah.
examples or anything in general that you think could be transferred to classrooms.
Yeah. I think probably a lot can be, but I would say, the thing that you hear about the most, the thing that everybody's talking about right now is AI, right? It's at the
Yeah,
front and center of everybody's discussion. And it sounds like this like one example of technology. It's a bunch of different technology solutions that are out there, many that have been here for a long time. But I think particularly for nonprofits, and probably very true for classrooms and educators today, it's generative AI. It's like how to use generative AI tools to help um, productivity or help challenges that nonprofits are facing. And so I think in particularly what we're seeing right now in the nonprofit space is that about 50% of nonprofit workers right now are leveraging AI tools in their everyday work. That doesn't necessarily mean that the organization has a plan or has all of these things around it, but the workers are already using this technology, and they're using it to help themselves with their own productivity. So that usually means writing grants. It means optimizing their fundraising strategies. It means creating drafts of emails, creating messaging for funders or for their volunteers. And so I'm sure you'll find the same with educators, where educators are trialing or leveraging these tools, maybe personally, maybe not necessarily in the workspace, but to
yeah,
think about lesson planning or to think about student assessments and personalization and things like that. And so I don't necessarily have all of the data on the education side the same way that we've been able to survey and learn a little bit more from the nonprofit sector. But because the challenges and the motivations are so similar, I would bet that they're also having the same kind of challenges, which is what I said before, right? Like an individual might be willing and wanting to play with things, but at the same time in the nonprofit sector, what we've seen is that despite basically most organizations having people who are using AI, 76% of nonprofit organizations don't have an AI strategy. 80% don't have a usage policy around their organization. So that means that people are using it, the workers are using it, but maybe not always with training, maybe not always with specific guidelines, maybe not also understanding the security implementation of how to like protect your data and what to use and where to use things and the impact of how your information can be shared. And so there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for thinking about how do we do that in a safer, more scaled way, especially knowing that it's probably already happening anyway.
Do you think, talking about AI, for those
Yeah.
who have implemented a strategy and are using it correctly, I guess, have you seen any difference in their like performance, or how they
Yeah.
address the different like education needs or technology needs in their nonprofits?
Yeah, so I would say that there's definitely a difference. There's a few differences that I would say. One is that I wouldn't say that anybody's doing it like there's a right way and a wrong way at this point, because things are changing and evolving
Yeah,
like all of the time. So it's really
for
hard
sure.
to be able to say, okay, you've got it, you've done it.
Yeah.
But I will say when there is a plan, when there's a strategy in place, or where there's like a investment to be able to say, how do we think about doing this together? A few things get unlocked. One is that when more people are doing something or using a tool, one, you have an opportunity to share. So your team members can learn from each other. They can learn from how other people are using it. And you create an environment where there's an assumption that you can be doing this together. The other part of it is that if you have one person that's like 10% more productive or even 5% more productive, that provides a real gain for an individual. But if you have 10 people who are more productive or 20 people more productive, you've just shifted the organizational time that you have to actually work on your mission or do other kind of more important necessarily things, or value-based things, I would say, maybe not more important, but value-based things. And so you have an opportunity there to really unlock a much bigger kind of opportunity. I think the other thing that you can also see is you start to shift from just the productivity to also unlocking some of the other features that AI can provide, right? So then you can think about, how do I leverage data differently? How do I build tools that would actually do some of these things for me, which is hard to do at an individual level. You really want to see organizationally to do that, to get a better sense of where you should make those investments.
Awesome. Now, thinking or stepping aside from AI, can you maybe share a story or maybe, yeah, some experience that you have for a nonprofit that scale its impact in a way that maybe educators can replicate and learn from?
Yeah, it's still a little bit with AI, I would say, but it's the way they used it, I think, is the story that I would say. And I think it's a small one, but I think it's also one that's probably the most true for most organizations. And I will just say, the nonprofits that TechSoup supports, 90% of them are the smallest organizations in the world. So these are organizations that have budgets under $1 million for a year. They're doing really important community work, but often without the same kind of resources that many have. And so there was an organization that we spoke to in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in the US, Community Rebuilders. They have about 60 staff, and they're focused on ensuring access to affordable housing. They actually recently implemented a specific productivity license. So they might have Microsoft 365. They implemented Copilot, which is like the AI assistive tool. It's built from ChatGPT standards, but it's linked with the work data that they have. So everything that they have in Microsoft, they can actually go through that as well. And so they've started as an organization using that to draft emails, to transcribe all of their meetings, to apply for funding, to prepare presentations, and basically to limit the time that their small team has to spend on these operational tasks that they were doing, and really move that towards the impacts that they need to be driving towards. And so they estimated that they have saved probably 15 hours of work a week. And that's not a huge technology change that really did that. It's a simple use case. But like I said before, when it's used across an organization, it really frees up a mental load. It frees up, most valuably, that I think everybody, educators, nonprofits, really value is time, right?
Yeah,
That
sure.
scarcity is something that is so integral to both, which is, if you can unlock a little bit of that time, it can be a hugely supportive function, if you're thinking about that across a school or a school system.
Now, we talked about a bit about budget and how it's similar in nonprofit and maybe public schools, or just schools in general. Um, Maybe it could be related to that, but if you find another thing for this question, that's fine
Yeah.
too. If you could challenge educators to adopt one mindset from nonprofit sector, what would it be?
I think they share a pretty common mindset already, because there's, a lot of shared of those challenges and kind of mission focus. But I think one thing that nonprofits can uniquely see and act on is that there has been a real receptiveness and enthusiasm to adopt tools a lot of times, especially when they see that the tool has a real benefit, a technology tool has a real benefit. And I think that's not always the case. Necessarily for educators, because they don't have that same kind of flexibility. A lot of times they have much more constraints onto what they have to do and what they can do. And so I know that there are reasons for it, but I do think if there's an ability to carve out time, safe spaces, safe tools, to be able to have more tech champions be given a voice or provided a playground, it really, really helps to be able to say what works and what doesn't, right? When people who are the ones who have to really see the benefit of technology are the ones who are able to champion, advocate for it, and advocate for the right solutions for them, you really see a lot of more adoption and a lot more opportunity for the technology to actually be transformative as a tool and not just something that they have to do.
Okay. Now, talking about this and thinking sometimes some teachers might not have the time as well as the not-profit sector to learn how to adopt this technology. Sometimes, there's so many, it could be overwhelming. Is there any strategy that you maybe use with nonprofits to help them transition into using these new like tools?
So I think I don't know if it's a strategy, but I think we have to know that these are adult learners who have the complete capacity of time is so constrained, so that you have to do like micro learnings. Like it cannot be full hour courses. It cannot be these types of things. So what we've tried to do with nonprofit workers is say, how do we give you tips and tricks that are like 30 to a minute and a half long that solve a key problem that you're trying to face, right? So it's like, if I know people are just trying to say, how do I input this donor data in this? I'm just creating a small tip for that. Because the reality is I'm going to search for that kind of question. I might have something that I need right now at this time, but I'm not necessarily saying, oh, how can I invest 4 hours of my week to be able to learn a new technology tool? I
Yeah.
wish I had 4 hours a week. I don't, I just have to solve this problem right now. So I
Yeah.
think the challenge for us really is to think about, how do we create bite-sized, you know, tools, tips that are available when people need it and how they need it, right? So is that within the tool that they're using? Is that within community forums that they're already on? Is that like a written thing? Is it a video guide? Like it changes dependent on what the problem is, but it really needs to be grounded in a problem that they're solving and a time oriented that's not necessarily expecting a huge investment, because it's just not something that they have.
I think that's a very accurate opinion. Sometimes we see teachers taking on different tools, and they're very excited to try
Yeah.
and innovate in the classroom, which is awesome. But what you say, sometimes we have to focus on the solution. What is this tool solving for me or for our classroom, instead of just using that. That's I think that's why sometimes they get overwhelmed, right? They're just trying so many
Yeah.
tools without like a set purpose, or trying to solve certain problem in the classroom, that then they don't see the point and get overwhelmed.
Yeah,
uh,
and it's really easy. It's like human nature. I mean, I think some of it, it's like if you don't see an actual benefit, it makes it really hard to want to invest the time, right? But like when you do see a benefit and say like, "Oh, I just saved myself 10 minutes by doing something in a different way." Like that is something that people are willing to invest in. They want to see that. They want to be able to free up their time to spend more time with their students or spend more time with the volunteers or things like that. So the real benefit and seeing that and feeling that benefit, even if it's a small one, is so important to get to quick.
Love that. Now, I mean, for the most part, we've been talking about technology, but of course, you have a background in the social component of it all, right? So, just kind of leaving that aside, how do you ensure people still remain at the center of work, even though, sometimes you prioritize
Yeah.
budget, technology, other stuff? How do you make sure that, you're always like thinking about the people and the final users?
Yeah. I think that's part of like the benefit, I think, of having some constraints all the time is that you have to be focused on that, because that's where most of your time is going in some ways, is to the direct beneficiaries. But I would say that with any type of thing that you're talking about, if you don't have the people who are actually delivering the services, the people who are actually speaking to the students or educating, or the people who are actually delivering the goods and services that you're using at a nonprofit, you're missing something, right? Because then you're not actually able to make decisions with the right mindset in mind. So to me, it's always about creating agency, creating kind of an opportunity for those who are actually doing the work, who are actually there to be able to champion for what their needs are. Technology to me should be a way to solve something, not a solution in and of itself, right? It's an opportunity to bridge a gap that exists. And if you don't understand those gaps, and or if you're not empowering those people who know those gaps to be able to say it, that's what's most important. And I would say the other thing is just asking people. Like I genuinely think a lot of times it's like when you have a whole bunch of volunteers. I was just sitting in a board meeting for a nonprofit, and they were saying like, okay, well, we only have to get donations through checks, but everybody's asking us for Venmo. Everybody's asking us for another tool because it's hard for them. So if we're not collecting that information, if we don't understand what our users or what our donors or funders or our students are expecting from us, we're not meeting them where they are either. And that makes it harder to kind of do the thing that you want to do. And so you have to understand and just ask, what is it you would need? What do you need for us to be able to serve you better? And sometimes it's simple as like a survey, sometimes it's simple as a conversation, but like having those is really, really important.
For sure. I think other guests have talked about
Mhm.
feedback a lot,
Yeah.
and how it's really important to have that feedback, in every step of the way, because you want to make sure that you are meeting people's needs.
Yeah.
So I think this next question relates a little bit to this one,
Okay.
but what does what role does community, like peer learning, networks, collaboration, play in driving that innovation for both nonprofits and in education?
I think it's critical. Like, I think it's so, so critical. And I think we have a unique opportunity in nonprofits and education because we're not always motivated by the same thing. So we don't necessarily have to view things as competitive or only for an individual benefit. We're thinking about the collective. And so, like I mentioned, the thing that I loved about this sector in general is that there are so many amazing people doing amazing things, right? So the idea that you can learn from somebody, that you can build off of what somebody has already done. You see that in many sectors. You see it in education and nonprofit. Educators have platforms that they've built to share resources with each other, right? So I can share my lessons plans. I can do these types of things and I don't have to start. There are great ways that you can do that. But what it takes, I think, the hard part about it is that again, you need the time. You need the time and you need something to simplify that. It's not that people don't want to take part and learn. It's that that platform needs to exist, that collaboration network needs to exist to make it easy to do so. And so I think when those do exist and when they are well kind of maintained and aligned with what people are looking for, that can be really transformative to be able to support, because people want to learn from the people around them and they want to be able to save the time. And I think every day there's a nonprofit that's built a new function or done something really interesting that would be so helpful to 100 other nonprofits in a different geography. But that scale, knowing that, that's I think the key to unlocking some of that success.
We're almost finishing. We have two more questions left. And for this one, I kind of want to have maybe some more actionable tips
Yeah.
or things that maybe nonprofits are doing right now to foster agency and ownership among their learners, that
Mhm.
maybe the staff that in schools can try
Yeah.
implement.
I think so one of the things that we've seen, I think, with nonprofits who've implemented technology successfully or things like that, or to provide agency, has been how do you form little learning groups? Like, how do you actually just create a learner group, right? It's like, if I'm going to do something, I can say, like, okay, for 5 people or a small community or small group, I'm going to give you a trial. I'm going to give you a license, but I'm creating that group. And then I create a structure to say, and you have to share feedback, right? And you have to share, how are you using it, sharing feedback. And those small things that you can do to actually create the structure to be able to say, how could you, what should we try, what are we learning, is so important. And I would say even at our own organization, we provided licenses to things, and what we see on the user feedback is people aren't necessarily using it, but that might be okay. And if we use that data and say, okay, now you have to take this course or you have to take something, or not mandating and saying, okay, you're going to join a learning cohort now. Everybody's going to join a learning cohort. every 2 weeks you're going to meet with them for 15, 20 minutes and just share something that you've learned, share something. But just creating that construct creates the kind of structure you need to be able to say, oh, I have that in the next couple of weeks. I should start trying something. I should start learning something. I should start doing something. And it doesn't have to be a huge time commitment, but creating the structure that's necessary is so important, because then it shows that you're actually carving out the time, that you're giving them something that is new and different. And you can do that through trials, or you can do it through anything. It doesn't even have to be technology, right? But you have to give that agency and give that structure to be able to
Yeah,
say it. Just saying, oh, have a voice doesn't really help somebody, because then the onus is on them to have to create the way to be able to relay that information. And I think organizations have to be able to provide that structure to allow them to be able to have that time and space to do it too.
definitely. I've heard some educators talking about guidelines and how
Yeah,
it's very important for any learner, could be like students or even teachers that
right.
are learning something, just to have those guidelines on how to use a tool, when not to use it, and also what to do if things don't work out, right?
Yeah.
So a structure, as you say, I feel like a lot of our guests have said it's very important.
Yeah.
Uh,
And it doesn't even have to be like, you know, a lot of times I will say, like, the people who are using the tool are the ones who are the best to create the guidelines for it, right? So give them a little bit and give them the ownership to be able to say, I want you to create the guidelines, and say that. And it just changes and shifts things, because they are the users. They do know best.
and then again, we talked about collaboration and how
Right.
it's really important to get that feedback from
Yeah,
community in order to improve those.
exactly.
Um, Now, just the final advice. Not nonprofits, as we said before, often have to do more with less. If you have to leave educators with one big takeaway from the nonprofit sector, what would it be?
So, obviously I think about everything in a technology lens, but the biggest thing that I would say is that what nonprofits always do, because they kind of can and have to, is that they think about technology as something that's going to reduce their burden, not be a burden. And
Yeah.
that is a mindset that I would absolutely say is like something that everybody should think about, is if it is a burden for you to do something, it's not the right tool for you, right? So how do you make sure that anything that you're doing is really helping reduce your burden and giving you the empowerment that you need to do your job better?
That's great. Thank you so much, Shruti, for all those insights. I think it's very interesting to see, how similar these two sectors are. So thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge with our viewers.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, and thank you everyone for joining us today. And I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.